There's a question Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche asks that's almost impossible to sit with. The difficulty isn't in understanding it. It's in how close it lands, how long you've practiced, how many teachers you've followed, how much of the language of awakening has become familiar to you. None of that is what he's asking. Just this one thing. What is the actual quality of your heart right now? Try to answer that honestly, and something interesting happens. The spiritual answer comes quickly, the one shaped by years of listening and learning, the one that sounds like the understanding you've worked for. But underneath it, if you stay a moment longer, there's something else. A slight hesitation, a recognition that the question is pointing somewhere the practice hasn't fully reached. That's where this teaching lives. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche was a Tibetan Buddhist master who spent decades teaching in the West. And there's something in how he described the foundation of spiritual life that refuses to stay abstract. He wasn't pointing at enlightenment as a distant state. He was pointing at something observable right now, in the texture of how we actually move through an ordinary day. He said something that cuts through a great deal of what we call practice, that if you wear robes, shave your head, pray on your knees every day, and still move through your life angry, proud, rigid, difficult to be around, you're not practicing spirituality. Whatever it is you're doing, it isn't that. Sit with that for a moment. Because most of us have a version of this that doesn't involve robes. We have our own accumulated forms, the vocabulary, the concepts, the teachers whose words we carry inside us. And somewhere alongside all of that, a recognition most of us quietly hold. Something in the interior hasn't changed as much as we hoped it would. The reactive pattern still shows up. The self-protection still closes in. In the moments that actually test us, the conversation that goes wrong, the person who irritates us without trying, the ordinary morning when nothing particular is happening, and yet there's this familiar contraction underneath. We respond from the same place we always did. What do we do with that? Usually we add more practice, more books, more understanding. We return to the sitting, the studying, the seeking, and there's nothing wrong with that, exactly. But there's a question worth pausing on before we reach for more. What if the problem isn't what's missing? What if it's something about the direction we've been looking? Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says that compassion is something very natural in all of us, something already present, already here, a quality that doesn't need to be imported from a tradition or manufactured through technique. He says it plainly, it's natural, already here, but because of deeply rooted, self-centered habits, we need to cultivate it as a practice. There's a movement in that description that's easy to miss. The habits are what we're working with. The compassion is already there, underneath, covered, waiting to be discovered rather than built. What I've noticed is that this reframes something I didn't know I was assuming. I had been treating practice as a kind of construction project, adding something that wasn't there, accumulating what I lacked. But if the quality is already natural, the work looks different, less like building, more like clearing. He says, through practice, we eliminate the stains and obscurations of non-virtue, and then qualities like compassion, love, and omniscience are discovered and become obvious. Discovered. The mind might move past that word quickly, file it under concepts already held, add it to what it knows about the path. That same mind that has been building, accumulating, measuring whether enough has happened. But notice what it's doing right now, even as you listen. Is it absorbing this to become something? Is it taking Chagdud's teaching and finding a way to use it? Is it already asking how? There's something circular in there that Chagdud doesn't resolve. The self-centered habit trying to cultivate its way out of self-centeredness, practicing openness from a place of vigilant self-monitoring. The habit doesn't disappear because we've understood it. It shows up in the very act of trying to understand it. Chagdud uses an image of life as a dream. He says, always recognize the dreamlike qualities of life and reduce attachment and aversion. He isn't using this to suggest that experience is meaningless or that the suffering of others isn't real. He's describing something about the texture of how circumstances arise and pass, the way we move through everything half caught, half awake, gripping at what we want and pulling away from what we don't. And then he says something unusual. He doesn't say wake up from the dream. He says, the trick is to have positive intention during the dream. That phrase moves the question away from some future arrival, some clarified state we're heading toward, and places it right here in the middle of the ordinary. The question isn't what level of practice have you reached. It's simpler and harder than that. What is the quality of intention actually moving in you right now, in this unremarkable moment, in the direction of the people around you? As compassion deepens, Chagdud says, the relentless self-centered focus begins to diminish. The intention to help others and the actual capacity to do it increases. He's describing what happens as something clears. As the obscurations thin, the attention begins to move differently, naturally, outward, toward. Not because we decided to make it do that, but because that's what was always underneath the habit. He points toward what he calls non-referential compassion, a spontaneous movement toward the suffering of another that no longer needs a practitioner at its center, where the doing and the doer have stopped being two separate things. The compassion becomes, in his words, the spontaneous reflection of our being. We've all touched something like this. In moments we didn't plan, someone in genuine pain, and something in us moved before we decided to let it. No technique was operating, just that movement, clean and immediate. And then, just as quickly, the one who noticed it returned. The practitioner stepped back in, took note, maybe tried to hold on to what had just happened, tried to understand it well enough to make it happen again. If I'm honest, I'm still not sure I understand the distance between practicing compassion and actually being moved by it. There's something in me that still reaches for the practice as a thing to do, something to maintain, to improve, to check on, and every now and then I notice how that very reaching keeps something at arm's length. The compassion staying just slightly separate from actual contact with another person's experience, like watching someone through glass instead of being in the room with them. I haven't resolved that, but I've started to wonder if the noticing itself is part of the clearing. The aspiration Chagdud leaves us with isn't a technique. It's a direction, an orientation of the whole being toward the relief of suffering and the happiness of others. Not as obligation or spiritual performance, but as the natural movement of a mind whose habits are thinning. Have a good heart, he says. That is the key point. The learning matters less than we think. The hours of practice matter less. If you have a good heart and the intention to help others, you will find genuine happiness. Something in that almost sounds too simple. And then you sit with it honestly for more than a moment, and you realize how far the question actually reaches. How much of what we call spiritual life is oriented inward toward the self that's trying to improve, to awaken, to arrive somewhere, and how little of it, maybe, is simply moving toward another person with warmth. The dream continues. The circumstances keep arising and dissolving, and underneath all the accumulated understanding, there's something quieter than any of it. Something the concepts haven't touched. Something the hours of sitting have only begun to approach. What is actually moving in you right now, in the direction of someone else? That question doesn't need an answer today. It just needs to stay alive. The way certain things remain with us, not because we solved them, but because they keep pointing at something real. If you want to keep sitting with these questions, there's more here when you're ready.